The Mustang is not an American horse. It is a Spanish horse that made a lucky escape. In the 1500s, the conquistadors brought horses to the New World. Some broke free, and over 2 centuries, feral herds spread across the entire continent. But here's the catch. Horses evolved right here, in North America, then went extinct 10,000 years ago, and came back by way of Spain. The Mustang is the only wild animal on the continent that is actually just coming home. Now, about the Comanche. In 1680, they had not a single horse. 50 years later, they were the most lethal horsemen in the history of the continent and had the entire southern plains living in dread. An entire empire grew up in 2 generations, simply because a few Spanish horses walked off into the steppe one day and never came back. This is the Mustang. And this is the story of what happens when nature returns to the place it was written out of.
If you've watched our previous videos, you already know. The most interesting stories in the animal world are the ones you won't find in a glossy brochure. The Mustang is a whole other level of irony. Let's start with what everyone knows about Mustangs, and with what almost everyone gets wrong. Horses appeared in North America 55 million years ago. They evolved here from a small creature the size of a dog into the animal that would later rewrite the history of humanity. From here they spread to Asia and Europe across the Bering Land Bridge, and then, about 10,000 years ago, they went extinct in North America, along with the mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, and most of the megafauna of that era. Why? Scientists are still arguing. Climate change, the first human hunters, or both at once. The fact is that the continent where the horse was born was left without a horse for 10,000 years. When Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico in 1519 with 16 horses aboard, he was technically returning an animal to its ancestral homeland. Cortés had no idea. The horses, apparently, understood completely. Some of them escaped almost immediately. Others were abandoned, lost, or captured in battle. By the mid-1600s, thousands of wild horses grazed across the plains. By the 1800s, millions. The continent that had gone 10,000 years without a horse got it back, and was instantly transformed. Nowhere was that transformation as total as it was among the Comanche. Before 1680, the Comanche were a pedestrian people of the Great Basin, a small, poor tribe of hunters and gatherers that practically nobody had heard of. Then they acquired horses, through trade and raids after the Pueblo Revolt, when the Spanish fled Santa Fe in panic and left most of their herds behind. In 50 years, the Comanche became the finest horsemen in North America. They could shoot a bow at full gallop, hanging from the saddle so the horse's body shielded them from bullets. They traded horses at a scale no other culture on the continent had known. They controlled a territory the size of France and held it against Spanish, Mexican, and American armies for nearly 200 years. That entire civilization, hunting tactics, military strategy, social structure, grew from nothing in 2 generations, solely because a few Spanish horses walked into the steppe one day and did not return. By the 18th century, the tribe held more than 15,000 horses. They became the primary horse suppliers for the entire southern plains, and set prices the way commodity exchanges do today. Neighboring tribes copied their tactics, their breeding methods, their military doctrine. One animal rewrote the entire map of power on the continent in 50 years. Historians call it one of the most rapid cultural transformations in human history. The horse planned none of this. It was just grazing. By the mid-19th century, there were roughly 2 million wild Mustangs in America. 100 years later, fewer than 20,000. For nearly the entire 20th century, Mustangs were killed. Systematically, industrially, and completely legally. They were shot from planes, driven to slaughterhouses, literally processed into canned dog food. Ranchers considered them competitors for grazing land. The Army turned them into rations during World War II. The federal government did not merely look the other way, it actively funded the process. Until 1959, there was not a single federal law protecting wild horses in the United States. The slaughter happened in a complete legal vacuum. No restrictions, no oversight, no consequences. In the 1950s, a woman named Velma Johnston happened to follow a truck with blood dripping from its bed onto the asphalt. The truck was hauling Mustangs to the slaughterhouse. She spent the next 20 years of her life fighting for their survival, writing to Congress, rallying the press, never once stopping. At some point, school children across the country joined the campaign, sending letters to Congress by the thousands. Congressional staffers, by all accounts, were mildly stunned. No conservation issue had ever generated that kind of written pressure before. And she won. In 1971, the United States Congress unanimously passed the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act. The Mustang was grandly declared a living symbol of the pioneering spirit and taken under federal protection. Velma died 6 years after her triumph, but her law is still in force. Now, to reality. Roughly 70,000 Mustangs currently live in the wild. Another 50,000 are sitting in government holding pens and distribution centers. The government burns through more than $50 million a year just to feed them in captivity. Think about that. Almost as many horses behind fences as in the open. More money spent on holding them in pens than on preserving them in the wild. The living symbol of freedom is logged in the books as warehouse inventory. To relieve the overcrowded pens, the Bureau of Land Management launched an adoption program. Any willing person could take a wild Mustang for free. Free. The response was catastrophically underwhelming. Some of the adopted horses later turned up at slaughterhouses in Mexico, the very animals the 1971 law was supposed to protect. It's so poorly arranged that it's almost embarrassing to point out. Ranchers claim the herds are destroying the rangeland. Advocates claim that's not true, and that the solution is fertility control, not roundups. And the government just keeps spending taxpayer money to maintain wild horses in empty corrals in Nevada. Not one side considers this situation normal. The Mustang survived a glacial extinction, 10,000 years of absence, the conquistadors, the cowboys, and the industrial slaughter of the 20th century. But now it has run into American bureaucracy, and it is hanging on by its last threads. Right now, somewhere on the plains of Wyoming or Montana, a herd of Mustangs is running. This animal appeared here 50 million years ago, went extinct, came back the long way around through another continent, gave an entire people an empire, was rendered into dog food, was granted the status of national heritage, and ended up behind bars again, this time officially, with its own line in the federal budget. No other animal in North America has been through a mangle like that. And no other animal has more right to call itself a native of this continent than the horse, because this is precisely where the horse first came into the world. It is called the symbol of wild America. It was born here, it came back here, and it still cannot feel safe here at home. And perhaps this is the most American story there is.